Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, Diablo had moved freely across multiple battlefields, diligently fulfilling Rimuru-sama's request as the Overseer. Cornu and Feldway had fallen into a deadlocked discussion that went nowhere. Vega had obtained his long-awaited redemption. Jahil, having unified the powers of Vega, Suyemu, and Kakeyashi, had completely overwhelmed the combined assaults of Carrera, Ultima, Sheon, and Luminous. And at that very moment, Diablo and Testarossa descended onto the battlefield. In this episode, Diablo finally demonstrated his true strength, delivering a live lesson to the three Primordial Demon Beauties and unveiling an entirely new combat system. His undefeated ultimate art, Celestial, was officially revealed. On another battlefield with Ciel's return, Rimuru successfully awakened Benimaru, and Benimaru's evolution could only be described as utterly absurd. In accordance with Rimuru-sama's wishes, Zegion and Diablo stepped aside, allowing Benimaru to take the stage against Jahil. So, let's get started. Diablo stepped forward and took control of the battlefield, calmly stating that while he acknowledged Testarossa's strength, this fight could be handled by him alone. He walked toward Jahil as if taking a casual stroll, showing no tension whatsoever. Even though he clearly understood that Jahil possessed energy levels several times greater than his own, a foe that even Sheon could not defeat, this only made him more excited. To Diablo, this was the perfect opportunity to prove to Rimuru-sama that he was more useful than the first secretary. His only concern was that he sensed Zegion approaching. To prevent his prey from being stolen yet again by that insect, Diablo needed to finish the fight quickly. Faced with Diablo's gaze, one that looked more like appraising merchandise than confronting an enemy, Jahil's immense pride exploded. He firmly believed that in the face of overwhelming power, tricks meant nothing. Without hesitation, he unleashed his all-in-one offensive and defensive technique, Blast Blow. As countless tentacles split and surged forward, vowing to crush this arrogant demon. The novel did not explicitly state it, but the hellfire generated by Blast Blow was clearly a pseudo-magical effect, similar to the earlier inward-driven use of Lord of Blaze. In the face of Jahil's killing assault, Diablo did not panic. Instead, he revealed a wicked smile and casually turned to the three Primordial Demon Beauties behind him, announcing that he would give them a proper lesson and that they should carefully observe his way of fighting. That single statement triggered completely different reactions. Once freed, Ultima and Carrera showed undisguised looks of irritation. Internally, they practically wanted to curse him out, but given Diablo's strength and Rimuru-sama's orders, they could only comply obediently. Seeing their reluctance, Testarossa immediately stepped in as the elder sister, scolding them. She acknowledged their dissatisfaction, but emphasized that this was a rare opportunity. Diablo was finally revealing his true capabilities, and this was absolutely something they needed to learn from. Testarossa sharply realized that the usually reserved Diablo was fighting seriously for a specific reason, and an observation opportunity like this was extraordinarily rare. Diablo strolled effortlessly through the swarm of tentacles, not even the hem of his coat being touched. This triggered intense tactical discussions among the onlookers. Even Luminous, a demon lord herself, was left in awe. Against such brute force, surviving on technique alone should have been nearly impossible, yet Diablo made it look trivial. Then came the demon's moment of realization. Ultima and Carrera quickly sensed something off. Diablo was, in fact, using magic. With sharp intuition, they soon deduced the principle. Although time outside was stopped, Diablo had constructed a space within his own body, isolated from external laws. Inside that internal domain, he could freely use magic to reinforce himself. The logic made sense, but executing it was nothing short of divine-level skill. In truth, Diablo was doing the same thing Jahil had done, only on a far higher level. Witnessing Diablo's overwhelming performance caused a shift in their attitudes. Ultima was stubborn on the surface, but soft at heart. She did not want to admit it, yet she could not deny Diablo's mastery. Carrera, on the other hand, felt her competitive spirit ignite. She now viewed Diablo as a towering wall she must one day surpass. Testarossa, ever the strategist, thought even further ahead. She was astonished at how Diablo had overturned an absolute energy disadvantage. First, he filled his physical capabilities to their absolute limit, using nihilistic collapse. Next, he bypassed the rules of the stopped world and applied magic to himself for reinforcement. Then, he maintained a perfect dynamic balance between bodily collapse and infinite regeneration. Finally, he layered it all with battle techniques refined through endless experience. What emerged was an entirely new combat theory. Testarossa realized that this was not merely a getting stronger, but a new combat system that fused magic and skills into a single framework, fundamentally different from existing paradigms. At its core was unparalleled efficiency. Aside from beings like Milim or the True Dragons, who could generate infinite magicules, the ultimate answer for most elites was eliminating waste and achieving maximum effect with minimal energy. Diablo had reached that realm. Testarossa calculated that even if the three of them tried to replicate this technique, it would likely take years, but for demons with infinite lifespans, it was still a learnable art. And then it hit her. Diablo was deliberately showing off precisely because he knew that, given enough time, they could learn it. That infuriating, smug attitude of, "let me teach you properly," sparked a quiet but very real irritation within Testarossa. After finishing his display of pure technique, Diablo finally used it as teaching material and revealed the truth to the girls. He explained that this was the truth he had arrived at by observing Rimuru-sama's wisdom and analyzing the granted power, Celestial Circle. Its essence required nihilistic collapse to be housed within Rimuru-sama's slime cells in order to function. The effect was absolute efficiency. Regardless of total energy reserves, consumption was controlled through perfect recycling, achieving complete harmony. Its conceptual status elevated prolonged combat into something effectively eternal. In later ages, this art would be known as the strongest undefeated combat doctrine. However, due to its extremely harsh prerequisites, it was ultimately inherited by only a very small number of Rimuru's top executives. Ultima and Carrera whispered to each other at the side, nodding in mutual confirmation. They felt immensely relieved that pestering Rimuru-sama for slime cells back then had been the best decision they ever made. Although their original bodies had already been in peak condition, the post-enhancement boost in physical performance made them never want to go back. Just moments ago, they had been irritated with Diablo. Now their attitude had completely flipped, even turning slightly tsundere. After all, possessing slime cells had become the ultimate symbol of exclusive privilege. As the only outsider, Luminous felt distinctly left out. Unable to hold back, she cut in and asked what exactly the three girls had received from Rimuru, and why she herself had gotten nothing. The Primordial Demon Beauties showed zero restraint toward her to the Demon Lord, and answered bluntly, almost mockingly. Carrera stated that it was only natural. Luminous had no particular relationship with Rimuru-sama. Ultima added that Rimuru-sama was their exclusive property. The demons quickly reached a consensus. Legislation must be enforced to ensure that Rimuru-sama's cells would never leak outside. This was not a joke. Later on, Rimuru himself fully agreed with this stance. More accurately, Ciel agreed, which resulted in Luminous permanently losing any future chance of obtaining slime cells. The focus returned to Diablo. His live lesson for the Primordial Demon Sisters was complete, and the remaining time was reserved for execution. He evaluated Jahil as adequate teaching material. As a form of thanks, Diablo decided to repay him with his full strength. He began raising his magic power. Even though his normal state already surpassed Jahil, he continued accelerating magical activation at extreme speed, pushing power to its absolute peak. Diablo prepared to unleash the strongest and most sinister art he could perform in the Celestial Truth State, End of World Requiem, later redefined as Celestial End. This technique was capable of completely erasing Jahil's existence. Because the recoil was enormous, Diablo began frantically absorbing surrounding matter and particles, instantly reinforcing his body and forging a physique capable of withstanding high-tier energy operations. Just as Diablo's preparations were nearing completion and the destructive blow was about to be released, Yivaraj's chillingly innocent laughter echoed across the battlefield. Diablo clicked his tongue in irritation. He realized that the time had come. His role ended there. The perspective then shifted to the battle between Rimuru and Veldanava. Rimuru's earlier void-devouring collapse blade had successfully shattered Veldanava's vaunted defenses, clearly shaking the creator god. Rimuru had prepared himself for the worst, but reclaiming momentum still left him quietly satisfied. He immediately tightened his focus. This was no time for complacency. At the same time, Veldanava's aura changed. He appeared to have resolved himself to cross the final line. Of course, we all knew he intended to activate Initialize Heaven. Yet, just as Rimuru sensed imminent disaster, Veldanava, who had assumed a terrifying offensive stance, suddenly stopped. Naturally, this was Ciel's doing. Although confused, Rimuru did not miss the opportunity. He cast aside hesitation and swung his blade. At that instant, Guy's warning rang out. Yivaraj was about to move. As the same chillingly innocent laughter echoed through the stopped world, Rimuru realized he had been caught in a pincer, Veldanava in front, Yivaraj behind. He could not help but lament how troublesome it was to maintain full situational awareness without Ciel's support. Yet Veldanava's attention was also drawn to Yivaraj behind him. For Rimuru, this created a far larger opening than expected. Veldanava was distracted. Rimuru considered himself an extremely cautious person, someone who grew uneasy without near-certain victory and never relied on fate. Battles filled with uncertainty were not his specialty. And yet, precisely because the situation was uncontrollable, when luck arrived, the joy pierced straight into his bones. Without worrying about the threat behind him, he committed fully and challenged Veldanava head-on. Veldanava casually caught Rimuru's sword, but this was entirely within Rimuru's expectations. The blade was a feint. The real strike came next. Rimuru clenched his right fist and poured all his strength into a brutal punch aimed at Veldanava's left cheek. The purpose was clear. The counterforce was harder than steel, and physical damage would likely be zero. Rimuru had only one objective: to reclaim Ciel. The response came instantly. Ciel shyly declared that she had come home. With Ciel's return, Rimuru was certain of victory. He issued his declaration of triumph to Veldanava. However, while basking in the joy of Ciel's return, he suddenly felt his viewpoint drop. He had finally managed to regain the handsome adult male Satoru form from his past life, yet before he realized it, he had been forcibly reverted to that familiar, beautiful girl slime form. Ciel was absolutely furious. The first thing she did upon returning was scold her master, declaring that such a form was completely unacceptable. Though being reprimanded out of nowhere felt unreasonable, the familiar bickering instead filled Rimuru with happiness. Once again, he confirmed it. Ciel was absolutely indispensable to him. Despite some lingering regret over being forced back from the handsome Satoru form, Rimuru confirmed that his condition was excellent. At that moment, the battlefield took a comically absurd turn. First came the shift in targets. Yivaraj completely ignored Rimuru and charged straight at Veldanava. For Rimuru, this was a much-needed breather. Second came a breakdown in cognition. Yivaraj began spouting nonsense, claiming that she was Lucia, that Lucia was herself. Of course, this was because Yivaraj had come into contact with the Genesis-grade sword memory, released by Veldanava, and absorbed its data, leading her to mistakenly believe she was Lucia. Internally, however, she remained the same embodiment of destruction, faithful only to desire and utterly incapable of empathy. Watching the two final bosses clash, Rimuru complained that these idiots were only causing him trouble, but deep down, he was secretly amused. He chose to sit back and watch the tigers fight, even hoping to reap the benefits afterward. Rimuru's original plan had been to beat down Veldanava, then gamble his life on soul gluttony analyze the enemy, and finally rescue Ciel, a dangerously high-risk strategy. In the end, it seemed he never even needed to activate the skill. Ciel had casually returned on her own. Thus began a classic back and forth between the two over whose credit it was and who was lying. Ciel shyly insisted that without Rimuru-sama, she would still be trapped. Rimuru instinctively felt she was lying. Ciel, however, firmly declared that lying to her master was something she had never done, not even once. Rimuru felt he clearly remembered being deceived several times before, but faced with Ciel's unwavering tone, he ultimately decided that thinking seriously meant losing. He chose not to dwell on it. At that moment, there was something far more important to him: Benimaru, still lying unconscious. Rimuru used instant motion to arrive beside the unconscious Benimaru, where Ramirez was keeping watch. Suddenly, Guy's voice came from behind, remarking that Rimuru looked surprisingly relaxed. He had copied Rimuru and used instant motion as well. Guy questioned why Rimuru was ignoring Yivaraj. Rimuru shot back that Yivaraj was clearly Guy's responsibility. In truth, both of them were thinking the same thing. They wanted Yivaraj and Veldanava to wear each other down for a while. For Rimuru, however, Benimaru's safety was the top priority. Rimuru asked Ciel to check why Benimaru's core was still active, yet he had not awakened. The result revealed an awkward truth. Ramirez's emergency treatment had been flawless. The problem was Rimuru himself. The power Rimuru had poured in earlier was simply too strong, forcing Benimaru's body to mutate in order to adapt. An evolution activated, and Benimaru evolved from a soul Oni to a dragon Oni. Upon realizing the responsibility lay with him, Rimuru adopted his usual stance. Since causality could not be definitively proven, he decided it never happened. He quietly averted his gaze and comforted himself internally. As long as Benimaru was alive, a change in race was not a big deal. Classic Rimuru-style responsibility evasion. With Ciel present, Benimaru awakened instantly. And his condition was frighteningly good. He had evolved. To prevent Benimaru from blurting out anything in front of Guy about his explosive increase in magicules, Rimuru hurriedly assigned him a mission to fight somewhere else. Benimaru wanted to return to battle too, but his beloved blade Gurren had already shattered. Ramirez then retrieved a staff from her treasury that had been forgotten for 2,000 years. A Genesis-grade weapon, the divine staff, Artha, aka Prosperity. The moment Benimaru grasped the staff, it transformed according to his will into a tachi. The deep crimson jewel left behind when the old Gurren shattered fit perfectly into a socket on the new blade. Though it retained the same appearance as before, the power it contained was on an entirely different Genesis-level scale. Rimuru felt a mix of frustration at having lost to Veldanava in weapon craftsmanship and curiosity. After the battle, he resolved to thoroughly investigate this Artha, wondering whether Ramirez's labyrinth held wealth he had yet to uncover, and what secrets the name Prosperity truly implied. Benimaru's confidence skyrocketed. He boldly declared that he would not lose to anyone now. Rimuru, however, felt it would be too harsh to send him against Veldanava or Yivaraj. Instead, he dispatched Benimaru and the ever-guarding Zegion to a subsidiary battlefield to deal with Jahil. Watching his two strongest subordinates depart, Rimuru was certain that battle was already decided. The perspective returned to Diablo. His role had arrived. He had long sensed Benimaru and Zegion approaching, carrying Rimuru-sama's orders. Jahil was now gripped by unprecedented anxiety. Despite wielding even more savage and overwhelming power, he was being completely suppressed on a sensory level by Diablo. Jahil's prized Devastator virus was effortlessly neutralized by Diablo's protective nihilistic energy, meaning he could not replenish himself by devouring Diablo. Yuki slipped away repeatedly, using instant motion impossible to capture. The three Primordial Demon Beauties were likewise protected by similar nihilistic energy, while Luminous and Sheon remained shielded by Luminous's tight defenses and the Beauty's interference. Jahil could devour no one. Although cryptid corpses littered the battlefield, the evil dragon beasts created within the stopped world could not move, rendering them tactically useless. Cornered, Jahil noticed Feldway, Cornu, and the others conversing calmly nearby. Cornu was currently housed within Habataki's body. Jahil became convinced that if he devoured Cornu and fused that power, he would become a perfect, flawless existence. He created an evil dragon beast resembling himself as a decoy in front of Diablo, then turned and charged at Cornu. This was not a retreat. It was an all-in gamble for evolution again. Watching Jahil's move, Diablo merely muttered in irritation, just as expected. He did not pursue. The baton had already been passed. Right in Jahil's path, Zegion suddenly appeared. With a single punch, Jahil was sent flying, his energy massively depleted. Jahil did not even register who had struck him before falling into confusion. As Jahil barely stabilized himself, he found Benimaru blocking his path. Benimaru stated calmly that he would handle Jahil. Remembering Rimuru's order to support Benimaru, Zegion folded his arms and stepped back, assuming a spectator stance. Seeing this, Diablo shrugged and accepted that his role was finished. He performed an instant, precise assessment of Benimaru's strength. Diablo immediately understood the truth of Benimaru's evolution. Benimaru had effectively died once and returned to life. In that process, he had acquired slime cells. That power greedily absorbed magicules, reinforcing Benimaru's body to the extreme. From a peak Flame Soul Oni, Benimaru evolved further into a Flame Dragon Oni, effectively becoming a sub-true dragon. His existence points easily exceeded 40 million, and with the Genesis-grade weapon Artha, his effective combat value surpassed 100 million. Diablo also understood Rimuru-sama's intention, to use this opportunity to temper Benimaru. Since it was his master's wish, Diablo gracefully withdrew to the sidelines, yielding the stage to the newly evolved Grand General. Alright, that's all for this video. Earlier, Guy had already reflected that with Soul Gluttony constantly absorbing and replenishing energy, the entire EP-based combat framework had long since become obsolete. For Diablo, the future Three Primordial Demon Beauties, and figures like Benimaru and Zegion, once nihilistic supply and slime cells entered the picture, the EP system became completely meaningless. In such a state, even the act of absorbing energy via Soul Gluttony was unnecessary. Diablo and Zegion's battle roles in Volume 23 concluded here, with Zegion earning a new nickname, One Punch Man. In our next episode, we will witness the battle between Benimaru and Jahil. More importantly, the core will shift to the clash and assimilation between Veldanava and Yivaraj, as well as Veldanava's final conversation with Lucia. In that moment, they will hint at the bond they share with Rimuru. The next episode will be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support was greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.